What's happening, brothers? Well, not a lot has gotten done here, but thought I'd show you a couple of things. We talked about the tunnel. So the tunnel's set up through here. That's like super lightweight foam, and it's set up to either use with your mufflers if you want those to come through a little bit instead of just exiting all in the cowl, or use your canisters or use your tune pipes. So real nice to have that tunnel in there now. Then one of the things that's always been kind of annoying, like on my Extreme Flight Edge, and then I think all the Extreme Flight stuff the last couple years that I've been around. It could be before that as well, but they have an anti-rotation tube that you've got to run the whole tube through the fuselage. Line it up with the wings. There's been a couple times I forgot to put the tube in. It still flew. So that puts a lot of force on a lot of pressure on your latches, because the anti-rotation tube is supposed to be there. But they eliminated that on this rev, the latest rev. So now you have a receiver for the tube. Let's see right there. But the tube itself, instead of having to throw a tube through there like we had to before, they just have an anti-rotation pin on the wings. So it's way more how it should have been all along. So now that just pin goes into the receiver and you don't have to slide a tube in. So you can't forget to put it on like I did, and it's quicker and easier. So that's cool. So that's two refinements. They have another refinement on the hatch for the dowels that go in, pins or dowels, whatever you want to call them, to the former two there. They got a big steel sleeve so that can't get worn and start, shaking and rattling and maybe eventually breaking, but even shaking and rattling is no fun. So that's an improvement as well. I bet you they did some other refinements. Then the big thing for the average guy is going to be that all the control horns are glued in. I want to show you a few things on this setup right here on this particular servo. So, I'm always harping on, really fine tuning all this kind of jazz, and on, geometry and resolution, mechanical advantage, linearity, synchronization, all this kind of stuff. And this is an example, why I talk about, that I prefer to put in. I don't know why Extreme Flight just doesn't make their trusses wider, since they send the Dubro conicals. If this was actually wider from this one, which they could do super quick and easy. I mean, they're making all these little refinements in the last 2.5 years since I've been back and telling them. Of course, I was telling them 10 years ago too. This is not just them, like every single manufacturer. But when on the wings, you saw where I was using on the ailerons, I'm just using the 1 1/4 hole. On the servo, this is 1 1/2. So this is a 2-inch arm, but on the 1.5-inch arms, I'm just using 1 1/4. Now, for pure 3D, if I was doing pure 3D, I'd use the 1 1/2. I even like the 1 3/4, on the ailerons. If I'm doing just old school 3D, which I don't do nearly as much anymore, like 10% of my flying or less. But, if I was just into that, I would want that. And the reason I'm bringing this up, you do need it on the elevators, which are usually linear in a different direction. But the rudder's the big thing, where you'll see what sometimes is on the entire plane, but typically always on the rudder. I'm at 1 3/4 here, so now I get more of an acute angle between the control horn and the servo arm. So, and then this control horn is higher than I would put it anyway. So if I was trying to sync up a servo on each side of the plane, which ultimately I may do here, and I do on my other planes, then you've seen in other videos, I'll take this entire control horn, put it down, cut the covering, make a new hard point, put it down here. Because there's so many things to get into, which I do every time, but, one thing leads to another and they all matter. But, if you want to take this servo arm and you're trying to sync it to a servo arm on the other side, then you want to put a protractor on here and you want to mark where this center is, and then you want to make sure this is centered up. Mark that center here on a protractor, and then push the whole surface, push the whole rudder over where you want it. You know, so for me that's usually like 55 degrees, but it's dependent on the stabs. You know, you can't go through the stabs. So if the stabs, let's say the stabs give you 50 degrees and you got like a half an inch left, so you got, you know, decent clearance, you know, or even 3/4 left for decent clearance. So that now you've established that. So let's just call that, you know, 50 degrees for the sake of even numbers. And then so it's going 50 degrees each way. The rudder is off of neutral. So you've marked the protractor that you've got taped on here at neutral, and then you move it 50 degrees each way, the surface itself. But then that's not necessarily going to be the degrees that this servo arm moves. So then you check that because you mark center. Now you deflect 50 degrees and you see over here that it's 35 degrees, you know, and then you deflect that to center, that your mark's still the same, then you deflect it 50 degrees this way, and then you measure on the protractor here, and that's 45 degrees. So let's just say, you know, because that's typically what it's going to be. It's just those numbers I just gave you. And now you can imagine if you put this on the other side, which, you know, numerous of my videos that are posted on YouTube right now say this, but you put this on the other side, it's the reverse. So when this is going 35 that way, on the other side, it's going 45. And then when that side, you know, when this side is back to neutral, then it goes 45 this way, then that side's going 35. So they're going at a different rates and speeds, so they're not going to sync up, you know. So that's what you get into. And, you know, guys do whatever. This stuff, the equipment's so good now, they just bind it all up, you know, and just let it wear out a little quicker, you know. But you can make the servos last longer. You can make them obviously have more power if they're synced up, and have your batteries last longer, you know, just the whole thing be better. If you're going to have one on each side of the rudder, to have them synced up, and to have the left and right rudder synced up on, you know, push-pull on a rudder, then the servo arm from center to equal deflection left and right, it has to also go equal deflection on each side. So you start with that, and to get that, what you'll notice is having, that's a long story that's necessary, but to show you that if you start getting into that, you'll see that the servo being down here and the control horn being so high up gets you in a spot where you get a bad linkage geometry. So then you'll want, once you get that even, you'll realize that you want this control horn down. So more in line with the side of the servo body. About a half an inch down from where it is now would be pretty good. So you have an acute angle now, even at 1 3/4, that can easily create a bind at different locations. You know, like right there, you can see it's you're binding, starting to bind. But I don't think I have a bind because I have the small OD, small outer diameter washers in there, which are helping me with that. But, you know, depending on how tall your control horn is, I mean, everything affects everything else. You could be out on 1 3/4 here, you know, and be more acute. But if you're trying to get more even, you have the control horn further down so that you're perfectly synced up on the other side, and then you're more acute as well. So then you're going to have that binding situation. So this is okay the way they have them now, and as long as you get those small washers that have the correct size washers for the bolt, 3mm bolt, but it has the small ID and small OD. You know, ID just barely big enough for the bolt to get through, and then a small OD. You know, then you can make all this work. But this shows you at 1 3/4 versus the 1 1/4 on the wings. And even though this is also in a different location on the wings it's a better location for geometry. It's lower, and then you know, closer to the servo body. And then here they made it different, you know, on the rudder. I guess because they knew you were using a longer arm to get the travel. So, because they're figuring, 38 degrees on the ailerons, and they're figuring, 55 on the rudder. So that's why they moved it. But that makes it impossible for you to sync with, halfway decent geometry or at all, two servos on a push pull, one on each side of the plane. So they've kind of made that impossible for you to do. But like I did on my other extreme flight planes, just cut this off, cut the covering, new hard point, new control horn. And then, I go ahead and spread it wide for conicals, and it's just all better all the way around. We'll let this fly for the moment and see how it does. If I end up, putting another one on the other side. And then, I realized that the only control horns I've broken are extreme flight. I've never broken a Skywing control horn that I can remember. So, yeah, we'll see how this goes. I almost crashed that edge. There are videos on my channel. You can see I'm just like 4 feet high, and then I roll up on knife edge, and then the control horn breaks off. And then I, have to level it off and, punch on the Harrier and just barely keep off the ground. So, yeah, that's, experience of one. It's hard to say, how many of these get snapped off, but, I do feel more comfortable with two servos on the push-pull, so I'm using two control horns. And then that's the way my edge is set up. And then you just don't have to worry about it. You've spread the load. But then you get into all this other stuff. Once you start doing that, you want to be synced. Once you want to be synced, you want the control horn moved. Once you move the control horn, you might as well spread it, put the conicals in so you don't have any binding at these points. Yeah. And even this 1 3/4, you don't know on any of these planes there's so many aspects to this. What your resolution mechanical advantage is going to be, because you don't know the length of their control horns. Extreme Flight uses pretty long control horns compared to Skywing. Skywing has a lot of really short ones on a lot of their planes, especially on the ailerons, but even all around they're shorter. So, yeah, you got to figure that out. If that's long, you're going to be longer here to get the same travel, but you're always looking for that, minimum length servo arm, the absolute minimum length that you can use to get the deflection you want on the surface. So with Futaba radio, I was always looking for 120, 120 on the endpoints on the radio on a default servo. In, factory reset default servo. If I got 120, 120, I knew I had what I wanted. If you have those kind of endpoints, then you do have max resolution or at least close to it. That gets into the linearity. So that's a good max resolution and mechanical advantage, because otherwise you get into being way non-proportionally linear, because as we talk about all the time, as the servo arm gets over here, it makes a big movement to make a little movement on the surface. So you don't want to get too much resolution and mechanical advantage. So in Futaba, that 120, 120 is really good. With Free Sky, 100, 100 is fine. 105, 105 is fine. They have set their radio up a little different so that you actually have more frames. And they actually show you the frames and everything. So you can see, in comparison with Futaba, that it's like 15 or 20 frames different on the endpoints. So if you're Free Sky and you're getting, 100, 100 or 105, 105, you're really, in an optimal maxed out resolution mechanical advantage. So like, again, all that stuff plays on each other. Even putting the ball link on the back, plays on each other. So that's what I'm looking for geometry wise. That's what I'm looking for geometry wise. But you can see there's a lot of, and I've talked about this for 25 years, and shown it over and over in reviews and videos. But there's a ton to it. Just because of the fact that we have this circular rotation that's swinging a 90-degree barn door, so there's a lot involved to make that as optimal as you can. And, and as you guys all know, that the further out you go, the less torque the servo has. The torque rating is going to go down the further you go out on an arm. So you're not looking to go out any further on the arm than you need to get the travel that you need. at an optimal resolution, which I said, like, is on FreeSky is 100 to 105 on your endpoints. You got it. And then with Futaba, like 120, 120, you got it. Yeah, and repeat myself again, like if you get up to 135 on Futaba, which I have done and you can do, or like up to 115 on FreeSky, then you're really getting proportionally nonlinear, so it's like you'll have a little bit more torque because, you'll have more mechanical advantage and you'll have a little more resolution, but you'll be very nonlinear. So there's all that. Now, having said all that, and I sure wish, all these guys, Pilot RC, Skywing, Extreme Flight, and everybody, I know they've watched these videos for years and seen my reviews for years, but I wish they'd pick up on this stuff so it would be more optimal. They're not terrible by any means, but they're not optimal, so I don't know why they don't do it, but I wish they would. Then it would be super nice if they glue in the control horns. So anyway, there's another, I think that's all the stuff I want to cover on that. So just the last little cool thing about running Hi-Techs and having the Hi-Tech programmer, this little guy right here, is that you could fully program the firmware on the servos, versus using a subtrim endpoint thing, which is just, faking them out. When you subtrim over, when you subtrim the center over, then you have less room this way and more room this way. So you're gonna see the results of that. If one servo is a lot different than the others, and you just adjust the subtrim, then you're trying to get mechanical advantage at its optimal and resolution at its optimal, and now you can't because that one servo is throwing you off. Like on an aileron, or because it's not matching the other three, the two on each wing. But then also even on just a single servo rudder like this, you can run into some stuff, which I just did. And then you're sitting here like me, and you've already run a nylon sleeve over the extension, and then you've cut that with a rope cutter so that it's burned properly so it doesn't fray, and then you've got the right heat shrink, and then you've cut that neatly and ironed that down, and then you've run it through the tubes, and got everything ready. And yeah, even heat shrinked on the servo to the extension, and you're all like dialed. And then you find, and I know you guys all have because I've had plenty of times, then you find instead of this being like dead on or like a 1/4 inch off either way where you're not too worried about it, the spline and the servo programming from the factory has got it set up to where it's 3/4. It's you either get to pick from 3/4 this way or 3/4 this way. And it's like the worst possible scenario. And then you have all this room. In this case, it goes way too far that way now, for left rudder. And then right rudder doesn't have enough, and then you're all nonlinear and in your radio and things aren't optimal. And you're like bummed. And, a lot of us, I'll include myself, but I usually don't, I'll figure something out. Instead, I don't really like to leave it like that. But a lot of people do, and they just adjust the radio, and they're like, yeah. In the old days, the guys would adjust the push rods, but there is an optimal place for your push rod, and that's regardless of the radio, so there's an optimal way to set up your push rods. I got videos going back 25 years that show this, and you just want to leave it. Once you have it optimal, you leave it. Don't start messing with push rods. But yeah, guys in the old days would do that a lot, and now guys will just use their radio because all this stuff is better. But it's so nice with the programmer that I can sit there and program the firmware. And yeah, there's so much stuff to say even on that, but I could just program the firmware to have a new center, a new endpoint to my radio stays, 0 subtrim and 100 and 100 on the endpoints. You still want to make sure that you have the right resolution and mechanical advantage on a factory reset stock servo, before you start playing with centers and endpoints, because you can trick it, and not really end up with the mechanical advantage resolution you want. But once you have that stuff set up right, the way we've just talked about the last few minutes and the way I've talked about for 25 years. Then if your splines are off, and you have that situation where you're just really off, you have to, compromise, then you don't have to compromise. You can use the programmer, and all that long story to get to like the trick I wanted to talk about on the programmer. The high-tech programmer has always been, a little time consuming, like to do a whole plane. I'm going to talk about that in a minute too, because it is really cool to do a whole plane. But it's not, it's a little bit tedious to do an entire plane. But when I need to fix a servo like this, is the point I'm trying to make. It's very quick for me. It's a one-time shot, because I'm not worried about small adjustments. If I'm an 1/8 inch off left or right, and even if I'm like a 1/2 inch off left or right of where I want to be on the travel, that's close enough. The whole reason I'm doing it, if it's that close, I never even would have programmed it. The whole reason I'm programming is because it was way off, because of the way the spline and the servo lined up. So in that case, I just take a quick calculation of, which way the center needs to go, left or right, about how much, and then I will, whichever way I move on the servo, inside, on the pot and everything, you got center, left, right. And if I have to move to line up with the splines, if I have to move the center this way, then I'm going to move the left a little further, and I'm going to move the right a little less, so everything shifts the same way. So I'll just make a quick mental calculation of what I want to do, and then I don't have to take the servo out of the plane or anything. I'll take the servo arm off and then plug the programmer into this side, the free end of the servo extension, and then I'll just hit those numbers, first try. And then, like in the case here, turn this thing on. That's how that ended up. Pretty good. But if that was an 1/8 off, probably even a 1/4 off, that was it. I'm already done. It's fine. And unless I really messed up, it will be at least that good, because it was 3/4 each way and I moved it. So should be within a 1/4, and it was actually dead nuts. The left and right on the rudder to get equal travel. One side was maybe a 1/4 inch from where I wanted it. The other side was maybe 5/8 of an inch from where I wanted it. But I don't mind adjusting the endpoints on that. And, I still ended up with like 95, 105, on the endpoints. So that's okay. You'd love it perfectly even. And you can do that if you want. With the high-tech programmer, you can get it all the same. But that's, it was very quick, very fast, not tedious, not, it's actually kind of fun, to be able to do that if you get it one shot like that. And that's what I'll do. That's about the only time I use the programmer anymore, is just to do that. And that comes up, every third plane or something. I'll have a servo that's just, didn't sync up with the rest, and with the spline alignment. And that's what I'll do. So that's pretty cool. And, we're pretty much done, but that kind of brings you to, the advantage of really programming the whole plane. And that's what got me into, like I've said so many times before, all this detail of getting all the elements, of the geometry as optimal as I can, is because you can program. And if you can, then why not do everything optimal? And the only plane I've done that on the last 2.5 years since I've been back was the Model Power, that magenta slick that I ordered, fuchsia. So I'm never going to let that go. And, I did that the old school way that I used to do all the planes. And that's it. First, take the time to absolutely get all the control horns in the right place, all the geometry optimal, all of it even, so you're everything's traveling equal distance from a to be determined center, for all the surfaces to be traveling equal distance, all the one you want, and that distance set up with the optimal mechanical advantage and resolution, all in advance. All that stuff's done in advance. And then once you know that, and you have your radio, once you do that, you could set your radio up to very high resolution. So on Futaba, I'd always go 135. On FreeSky, I would go 120. And then from there, it's a little bit tedious, but each servo you can take and make every center dead nuts and every endpoint dead nuts. And then you have a perfect plane. And I used to be so OCD about it that I just couldn't live without that on every single plane. Plus the equipment was not as good, so it was really an advantage. But it's still nice, you know. But we use less servos now, and yeah, they're more linear out of the box. And I just use it for stuff like this, like to get one close and then just fine tune adjust it with the subtrim and endpoints. But if I've got to use too much subtrim or endpoints, then I'm going to bring the programmer out. But again, you got to make sure that you've got everything set up right before you do that too, or you're just cheating it and you still won't end up with the mechanical advantage and resolution that you want. You know, probably not even the linearity if you cheat it too much. So everything I've been talking about for the last 26 minutes is all important. All you need to know all of that to have an optimal setting. You need to understand everything I've said, you know, thoroughly, and then you can have an optimal plane. Can you just slap one together? They make them good enough now that you could just slap them together. That's what most guys do, you know, and they're going to be okay. But if you don't understand all this stuff, you can't make it optimal. But yeah, that's kind of the whole thing. That was a 27 minutes to sit there and tell you that what I do when I have one servo that's off is, you know, make sure I've got everything exactly where it needs to be, you know, and then use a programmer for one adjustment. You know, I don't trial and error like I do when I do an entire plane to make it perfect. You know, I just get it within a quarter. Good enough, you know, and then adjust it. Shoot, man, yeah, not making much progress on this so far. Don't even have the stabs done. I got the rudder done. It's like it. That's like really it. And I have the extensions in. And I did update the firmware on the receiver, which kind of blows my mind because I have a bunch of these receivers and I thought I had updated them all and used them all, but I had one I guess I did not update or use. I still got to swap pull the motor off again and put that extra extension on, you know, extra black washer so that the spinner will clear. Yeah. And yeah, I'm still a long ways away. Kind of thinking I'm going to go ahead and cut in the smoke system. I'll probably take in CA, iron it plane down really good, and then thin CA all these laps of all the covering. That's what I used to do so that I could smoke it up and not have too many problems. So I'm already like deep into this one again, like I always do. There was one or two in the last 2.5 years. I think a couple of Skywings I did. Yeah, I think those are the only ones that I actually did like 2 nights. You know, got them done. Did like 12 hours. You know, and I made videos of that too. But mostly I just start getting down the rabbit hole. the anal retentive OCD rabbit hole, and seems like I'm there on this one again. So chances are I'll put the smoke in. I mean, I really would like to do the 2 servos and move the control horns and all that stuff. I don't know. I hate to take it up like I did the Edge and have that control horn snap off, you know, and that was the Extreme Flight control horn too. Yeah. Oh, we will see what happens. But yeah, I'm pretty down the rabbit hole at this point. Oh, I really got to measure for some graphics and get those ordered. Yeah, I got to think about that. Do I just want to cover up all that pink? Or maybe put a big pink high-tech on there. And a big pink free sky. I got to look at it right now. I'm babbling. That's kind of it. 30 minutes. I hope you guys get all this. 25 years been talking about it. But yeah, the manufacturers still don't go all the way with it. Better than they used to. Everything used to be 90, you know. So you can see even their setup is not 90 anymore. So like they're catching on. They just haven't gone quite all the way with it. All right, triple babbling. I'm out.